everyone, I'm Chloe Johnson and welcome to this Fresh Business Thinking webinar series, Lockdown Learning for Businesses, supported by BT. BT Skills for Tomorrow aims to empower businesses and their employees with the digital skills to help grow their business. The Skills for Tomorrow website includes free learning content that small businesses and their employees can access at any time on topics such as promoting your business with online advertising, making sure your customers can find you online, and much more. To find out more, you can click on the link in the comments. Coronavirus is continuing to be a challenge for small businesses and entrepreneurs across the UK. The outbreak leaves an overwhelming uncertainty into the future for business owners. But this is a time when, as a business community, we need to come together and support one another. And we're lucky enough to work with organisations and individuals who are passionate about supporting entrepreneurs during this difficult time. Two of those as our speakers today, Keith Weed and Ritchie Mijita. Keith Weed is Director, Trustee and Advisor of businesses and non-for-profit organisations. He is a Board Director of Sainsbury's and WPP and is also an angel investor in several startups and early stage companies. Ritchie Mijita is the founder and CEO of School of Marketing, a leading education platform that serves companies of all sizes. A business leader, speaker and consultant who has worked with a range of organisations, including HSBC, Direct Line Group and Toyota, to transform their marketing capability. Today, Keith and Richie will discuss the specific marketing levers that companies can deploy to not only survive in the short term, but build their brand equity over the long term to take advantage of the eventual upswing. Keith and Richie will be talking for around 40 minutes and then we'll have some time for a Q&A. So if you do have any questions, leave them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and we'll do our best to get to them later on in the session. That's all from me for now and I'll pass over to you, Keith and Richie.
Thank you very much, Chloe, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk to so many entrepreneurs at the moment. I mean, it's a real pleasure to be here today with Keith to share some insights on marketing and how SMEs can navigate the current situation to come out good at the other side. Before we get into any sort of specific questions or topic areas, I think the key thing for me is to acknowledge that it's really not easy for anyone. And in fact, the SMEs at the moment are pretty much at the coalface of this crisis, and they'll be struggling quite a bit with the uncertainty of the environment. You know, to me, I think it's been around 6 months, depending on how you kind of calculate the beginnings of this crisis. And I think it's got to a point where we're kind of over the shock and we're into a little bit of a lull moment. And I think perhaps this is almost the toughest moment in time as we try and navigate the uncertainty, but yet there's this sort of bedding in sort of period where we're just very unsure about what's going to happen next. And I think for me, you know, there's a great sense that SMEs might be feeling that you know, you might be alone or isolated. I know that, you know, governments may well start to pull back on their support, as it were. And so it can be really unsettling. And I think for me, when I think about our role as an organization, and, you know, even working from home with remote teams, it's starting to get a little bit, should I say, or dare I say, isolating, and to that extent, I think we're all feeling the pain. So, you know, I would just say stay strong, and I think there's, you know, that we as SMEs are at the forefront of being the innovators to come out of this crisis on top. And we'll come on to that as part of this talk as well. But before we go into any sort of specific questions, I want to tell you a little bit about the format. So it's going to be really informal between me and Keith. We're just going to have a bit of a discussion. And in fact, what we've got is 5 key killer questions that a lot of SMEs have asked us over the last couple of months. And we thought what we would do is just bounce around those questions and on the back of it, ideas on how to navigate these shores. And then thereafter, as Chloe said, we'll take any questions that you guys may have in the most honest and transparent way that we can. So Keith, over to you for some opening remarks. And I think you're on mute, Keith.
Yes, I think the host needs to mute and unmute me. Good. Right, so I'll say that again. So the first lesson is you make sure you are not on mute. The second, no, seriously, great to be with you all. And I very much echo the words that Richie is saying, because at the end of the day, this is a tough time for everyone, but certainly from my perspective, of course, small and medium-sized enterprises have less resources than some of the big companies have, and within that, then some greater challenges. And one of the things you might be saying to yourself, then, well, what can Keith Weed, a guy who used to be the chief marketing officer of Unilever, with the second largest advertising budget in the world, spending billions, what does he know about this sort of area? And I suppose the first thing I'd like to do is reassure you that since leaving Unilever, I've been working on a portfolio of different roles, including, as you heard, being on the board of WPP and Sainsbury's. But perhaps even more importantly, for the discussion we're having right now, I'm on the boards of 4 charities. And let me tell you, charities have been really hit during the period. They don't have the same resources or opportunities for loans in the way businesses do. And on top of that, of course, as mentioned, I'm an investor in startups, and within that, a whole range of different companies, from e-commerce doing very well, through to some of the content side being a little bit more challenged, influencer marketing doing well, and you get a feel of a portfolio. But perhaps the best thing I can bring is just speaking to lots of people. So I'm not in one business and trying to share with you my perspective from that. I am talking to multiple people, and the wisdom of crowds, the wisdom of bringing lots of thoughts, none of us as smart as all of us to the table, hopefully will help a little bit. So that's my background. I know Richie well. He's a perfect example of someone who's going through these challenges right now, being in a startup. It's a pleasure to be with you, Richie, to have this conversation.
Keith, thanks for that. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think sort of trying to take every day as it comes is kind of the mantra at the moment, and with it comes its ups and downs. So you're absolutely spot on. Keith, let's move on to the first question.
Yeah.
And this is really about advice. So a lot of people have been asking us, what is the one piece of advice that you would give SMEs right now from a marketing perspective? What would that one piece be?
Well, let's remind ourselves what marketing is to start with. Marketing is about being consumer focused, customer focused. Marketing is about creating customer-led demand. Now, in all those words is the word customer, consumer. So I think the one bit of advice I would have is with all the stresses and strains out there, please don't forget your customer. And you might say, well, that's obvious. But it's surprising how many businesses, not just businesses, us individually, become very internally focused at a time of stress and challenge. And in that, they start distancing themselves, perhaps not even intentionally, from their customers. I'm a great believer that 80% of success is showing up. And of course, some businesses have shown up in front of their customers, but actually an awful lot of businesses, for all sorts of reasons, haven't. And part of it is because you can only spend your minute once, and you're spending your minute running around trying to save your business. Where do I get the time to focus on my customers? The tricky thing is, though, is customers, consumers, they forget. And their lives are equally challenging in different ways, but equally challenging. So if we don't keep engaged with our customers during this period of time, I'm afraid your competitors and other options and opportunities will be tempting your customers away from you. And it doesn't need to be extravagant budgets, etc. But you need to find innovative ways to keep with your customers. And that would be my prime bit of advice. I suppose if I could allow to add on. Oh, sorry.
No, go on, by all means.
I was going to add on and then over to you. Sorry, I didn't mean. But add on one thought is are there innovative ways you can engage your customers and finding ways to engage them? So there's companies like now one I'll say up front is a company I invest in, Limitless Technologies. But Limitless Technologies basically use their customers, their loyal customers, to work on their behalf on care lines as a way to not only engage their customers, but also help them get some sort of gig economy work with tremendous success. I mean, they're working on behalf of brands, helping out on care lines and being paid for doing so. But also you're pulling those customers deeper into your way, and sort of starting with co-creation ideas about how you get your customers to be part of the solution, as well as engaging them going forward, and trying to work out which customers are best to segment and talk to. But my prime thought is, amongst all the marketing advice, is find creative ways to engage your customers and keep yourself present in front of them. Over to you,
Great,
Richie.
Keith. Well, look, I just want to build on that, because I think there's a real danger that we have right now. And it's a lovely phrase that I read just over the weekend by Seth Godin in his book, Lynchpin. And he talks about that we all walk around with our own worldview, and we think that our worldview is the dominant worldview, and everyone shares that same worldview. And actually, as a marketer, we know that you couldn't be further from the truth of that point. But when you're stuck in your rooms, in your makeshift offices on Zoom the whole day, and you get very isolated, and we all know that media consumption is up at the moment, or digital media consumption certainly is, there's a real danger that you fall into a bubble. And what this bubble, and Ali Parsner, a great TED Talk, talks about these filter bubbles, where actually when you're on digital media, what's happening is it's personalizing the content just for you. And as a consequence, you're turning your own worldview of this narrowly defined, isolated moment in time, and you start to believe in the Kool-Aid of what you think is what everybody else thinks. And I think there's a real danger in this time when we're isolated that we actually get the blinkers on at a time when we're actually supposed to get the blinkers going outwards and takes them off. So I think your customer point of view is great, but there's a real danger that we don't do that. My one piece of advice, really, it comes down to a Harvard study that I recently read about. And it says that it's only 9% of companies that actually get through a recession better off than when they started off. So the club. And some people would say, look, cut all your costs. By the way, marketers would advocate actually increasing your costs at this time. I would, well, in fact, Harvard says actually it's a balance of being, on the offense and on the defense at the same time. And it's getting that balance right, which is critical. How do you do that from a marketing perspective? Well, actually, there was a great campaign that was done by KFC, and marketing director Jack Hincliffe talks about this. And he said there's a need for ruthless prioritization. Prioritizing what products you focus on, prioritizing what channels you focus on, what creative you focus on at this time, is really key for us. So we've only got a certain number of hours in the day when our kids are not on our laps. So what are you focusing on during those moments in time is absolutely critical here in order to succeed. A good example of that is KFC's We Missed You campaign. I won't go into details of it, but it's a great viral campaign where they actually used their own customers or the most loyal customers' creatives, thereby saving creative costs. It went viral. It showed other people that that their customers loved them. And so all these things together created the magic. And by all means, watch the case or read the case on Marketing Week. It was a great case study that's worth getting into. So that's what I would say. Ruthless prioritization is key.
Can I just pick up the first point you said before ruthless prioritization? Because I do think ruthless prioritization is a splendid bit of advice. Probably one I should take on board as well. But the point you said before that about not having your version of the truth, and I think that's a very powerful thought as well. So if we talk about don't let your customers forget you, find ways of showing up in your customers' lives or memories, whatever. But also, you're right to think about how has the world changed. And I often say, one of the jobs of a marketer is to bring the future forward and the outside in. And marketers in business, I think, are probably more valuable now than ever before because we need to understand where the world's going as best as we can. I mean, no one's going to have a perfect crystal ball, but if you can have like 2, 3, 4 trends of where things might go, you'll be better prepared for the changes as opposed to being caught by surprises. And if you can get to the future first, you'll then have a better chance of succeeding and welcoming your customers as they arrive, as opposed to seeing them disappear. So I think I love that thought of trying to really force yourself of getting different opinions and different views, and not just what's on your Instagram feed or LinkedIn or whatever. Because remember, all those things you've self-selected by who you're following. So you've already bubbled yourself, and if you're not careful, if there's such an expression, you're double bubbling yourself. And that's a real risk. That's a nice point, Richie.
Yeah. So Keith, let's move on to the second question then, about practicality. I think a lot of SMEs right now are looking both in the near term and then perhaps in the far term around how they're going to navigate out of this. What practical tips would you give people in order to navigate the pandemic and what's currently, and I guess pick up on the rebound?
Yeah, I think, well, you're feeding me wonderfully the line I was going to say anyway. I think, the first and most important thing any business does, big or small, when hit by such a big shock as we've all been hit, is to make sure you can survive. And hopefully most of the people who are listening have survived and are still in business. The first thought then is, well, first of all, about your employees. Are they safe? Are they going to be able to work from wherever they are, etc. But right behind that is, are you liquid? Do you have the cash to survive? Are you running out of cash? And certainly what was true at the beginning and still now for a lot of businesses, they're living off the orders that were made pre-COVID and the cash coming in. And one of the things very worrying we've noticed now doing some work for the government is the time for people paying is extending. So despite a lot of push for saying, pay people on time, a lot of people are taking a little bit longer to pay people. So I say a lot of the funds that people are living off right now are sort of pre-COVID sales and orders with the money coming through. And of course, have yet to have that second wave of a lower level of orders hitting us due to the lower level of sales. So making sure that you're going to be solvent is incredibly important and focusing on that accordingly. Now, that's an obvious one in one way, but the trouble is you then get into the habit of nailing down all the costs because that survival feeling is so tough in all of us. It's a very natural response. That if we're not careful, to your point, we miss the bounce as we come out. And what would be sadder than having the suffering of the down of COVID, followed by the suffering of missing the up and getting a double down. So what you really need to do now is, depending on where you are in the country and depending on what your views, optimism or pessimism, things are going to start opening up early July one way or another. And depending on your business, that could be opening up a lot or a little. But I reckon that you will find, through July, radical changes going on. And in those radical changes, how well are you suited? Have you spent this time in preparation or in hibernation? If you're in hibernation, well, I suggest you now hit the preparation button really, really hard because we are days, weeks away from coming out of this. And that's why I think we need to switch our mind from the survivor, CEO, CFO, the finance person grabbing the strings of the purse, through to thinking more of a marketing person investing. As you mentioned, it is about investment. And let me use one parallel. That's the only one I'm going to use from Unilever. So let me have this one example because I was there as such. But at the beginning of 2008, 2009, and the last massive financial crisis, we were doing exactly what I was saying. We were battening down the hatches, reducing costs, making sure that we had enough liquidity going forward. And then as the chief marketing officer, I made this proposal that actually what we really need to do was lock down all our costs, but if we could possibly afford to actually increase our investment in marketing, because if we did that, we would be the head of everyone else. So in 2009, we increased our marketing investment by 4.8%, in 2010 by 14%, and over the next 5 years after 2010 through to 2015 by over €1 billion. Now scale back those numbers for your business, but we increased our investment while everyone else was holding back. And actually what it did is it doubled the impact of our investment. And our business grew every single year for the following 9 years when I was CMO in Unilever, and grew profits as well. And we tripled our share price. Now, I use that as a practical example because I know the facts because I was there. but also try and encourage you. There's a great Kantar study done with Brandsy looking at that last crisis. And I know this crisis is different from the last crisis, but I think if you just think about it conceptually, if everyone else is cautious and you can afford to be that little bit more optimistic and ambitious, you can steal a lead over your competitors. And as consumers and customers are getting more interested about re-engaging, if you can be the person saying, hello, I'm here, have you thought about X, Y, and Z brand? You stand a much better chance of catching the bounce rather than being buried by the bounce as people jump on it as well. So I know it's hard because we're feeling very defensive and protective and not feeling particularly positive right now. But I think if you can just try and get on that front foot, there's a lot to be gained.
Keith, I love that thought. And you talk about the front foot, and you talk about being able to invest at the moment. I think, sitting at the cold face of it at this point of time, what my philosophy has been is to substitute money for effort. And I think in today's context of clever marketing, of creative marketing, of social marketing, we can actually go tremendously far without actually having to spend much money if we can get the formula right. And so I think your point is absolutely tremendously well made. But when we talk about the role of investment, I think as an SME, we need to think a little bit more broadly than just a financial investment. I think there's plenty of other ways to think about this. I mean, for instance, one thing that's held us in really good stead, and I encourage everyone to think about it in this way. One single word, a gift. Give your customers a gift of something, whatever that is, your time, your effort, a freebie, a trial, whatever that looks like, your most prized customers, because they will really appreciate that of you, and don't expect anything in return. I think that there's an element of altruism at this time, but whatever you can offer to add value, I think there's tremendously something very practical in doing that. Customers genuinely will remember that. The second thing I would say is around partnerships. Leverage flipping partnerships, guys. These go far and wide. I mean, think about David and Goliath, right? Think about Goliath and David and David, whatever the analogy you want to draw, right? But by being able to actually, stand on the shoulders of some giants, and they could be, a business that's slightly larger than yours. They could be a national company. They could be whatever it is. Add value to that. You might have a super product. They may have distribution. Bingo, right? You're in. It's using those things smartly that I think is going to be, hold you in really good stead. The other thing, and I know we're all suffering this at the moment, cash being king and all that kind of stuff. The one metric that I'm using tremendously, or the most important metric I'm using in this respect right now, is something called the cash conversion cycle. And effectively, and Keith kind of alluded to this, right? He said that actually your customers are taking longer to pay you than they typically should at this point in time. Well, actually, if you measure your cash conversion cycle, which is the time you start producing your product to the time that someone pays you, and you try and minimize that as much as possible, you're going to start to increase your liquidity. So every single day, I am looking at my cash conversion cycle. And by the way, this is exactly what Amazon did during the dot-com bubble to survive as well. So if you can shorten those days down, it's going to help you tremendously, and it's going to keep you out of bank loans and finances and all sorts of things like that, which will only, if you need to, fine. But actually, it's obviously better not to. The last thing I'll say in terms of my tips is innovation and test like crazy. We've entered more government competitions than we ever have before. Honestly, I entered 4 of them, and I lost every single one. I never won a competition. It sucks. In fact, the Innovate UK competition with 20 million prize fund, there was something like 8,600 applicants, and there was like 100 prizes or whatever. We didn't win, but you know what it did? Is it gave us the ambition, it gave us the thought, it gave us the need and desire to keep pushing for a particular goal. And I think that's what kind of motivated our team. So innovation is great. Get into competitions. There's more opportunities out there than you potentially can probably think about. So I would say that's some of the key things that we are certainly doing and I would do at this time. Keith, crystal ball time. What do you think is going to happen post-COVID? What do you think are some of the changes that we're going to see? You talked about the future. What would be some of your advice in that?
It's interesting that what are going to be the changes. I can remember you just talking about Amazon, and it reminds me of a quote from Jeff Bezos, and he says that, you know, people keep asking me about what's going to change into the future, and I don't really know. But what people don't ask me is what's going to stay the same. Because what's going to stay the same is you can build strategies and fortresses on, and what's going to change, you need to build into your business flexibility and agility to then address those. I mean, obviously he has a perspective of the future, but he's saying, like, you can't sort of predict the future. Having said that, you know, what is going to stay the same are, of course, all the core things about, you know, the broad things about building brands and building businesses. That's not going to go away. But I do think some things that have changed are going to stay. And that, in reality, are a big change for the businesses that we've had. So what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, funny enough, keeping on the Amazon thing, e-commerce. So I think in the first 15 days of COVID-19, we got our next 15 years of penetration of e-commerce, you know, people coming online. I mean, people that would have ultimately come online to buy things, but weren't going to come online for many years to come. And so we've seen a step change of all sorts of people learning about shopping online who weren't before and are not going to disappear. Now, I think the frequency, the intensity of online shopping, of course, will drop when the bricks and mortars open up. But once the benefits of e-commerce have been seen, people don't go away. So we're going to see an ongoing level of e-commerce much, much higher than it was before, even if it's not as high as it is right now. And that, I think, is going to have a profound impact on businesses, because, you know, businesses were set up to either service, brands going through a bricks and mortar approach and a little bit of e-commerce, unless you were already 100% e-commerce. And if you were already 100% e-commerce, you're in a good place to ride this going out. So I think the first thing is direct to consumer, and direct to consumer, yes, in sales, but direct to consumer, as you were hinting to as well, in how you might want to engage your consumers and speak to them. So e-commerce, if you haven't got a winning business model on how to perfect yourself in e-commerce, now's the time to drive that and finesse. And to be perfectly honest, we're talking here to a load of entrepreneurs and SMEs. The one good thing about being a little bit smaller than the big guys is you have more agility than they can ever have. So, now's the moment to shift your business and use your size as a benefit, because those big juggernauts will take longer to change their business. They have embedded costs and legacy systems, which will take much, much longer to turn around. So the first thought is about e-commerce. That is a change which I think is going to stay. Another change which I think does impact us as well as brands and services and entrepreneurs and businesses is the way people have engaged in media differently. So you're right, there's been a huge step up in people watching things online, on Netflix, or on TV, and we call it work from home. And you are all employers out there. Let's be clear, if you look at the amount of content people are viewing, I think it's sort of work a bit from home and watch a lot of media from home is happening. So there is enhanced productivity for people working at home, but there's also a hit as well, because frankly, if someone's in the office and they put a large TV on their desk, you will notice they're watching TV, but you can't quite notice when they're at home. But that actually increase in watching media, I think is going to stay. But people are going to watch the new media they've learned about. So I think digital media has had another step up. So whether we're talking about obviously Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, and so back to brands and services. Have you really got those how-to videos up and running to the quality that you would be happy with on YouTube? Do you really have an online approach to media that's as much as you are proud of, given that consumers have moved that way? And I think they will stay. There'll be a drop-off, but they will stay for the time being. And those to me would be two big changes. But of course, with that comes another change, and that's the use of data. So we've been talking about data as businesses now for years, of course, there's been fantastic progress, but we still haven't had quite that magic of data. And I think we quite haven't had the magic of data that we've all been looking for, because we've been blending first, second, and third-party data. And I think what we'll see with this increase in direct consumer, whether that be your direct consumer selling and shipping through Instagram or whoever, or direct consumer through e-commerce sites, and of course this direct consumer media is the increase in first party data. And with first party data, of course, you can do much more personalization, and you can do personalization at a scale like you can never do without that quality of first party data. And I think that is another change that's going to stay. So if you look before COVID and post COVID, you often say that the future is around us already. It's just not well defined. And I think the future is around us, and that is greater direct-to-consumer sales, greater direct-to-consumer media, more digital media, and a much greater leverage of first-party data. And if you can take advantage of that, I think then you'll be in a good place as these businesses start to develop in a post-COVID world.
Love it, Keith. Love it. And I want to pick up on your media point. Right, guys, I've got a challenge for all of you. What I want you to do, right, is listen to the mantra, okay? Stories beat quality. Simple as that. Get your phone out, get on your, start creating content, start putting it out, start telling your story of your businesses, put them up in the social media channels, and continually do that. And then the next step is inviting other people to do that with you and talk about those experiences and start building up that following, start building up your tribe, start building out your super fans. And don't worry too much right now, because people will forgive you if they see it's on your mobile phone, because they recognize the situation is okay to do that. So I want everybody, right? Or I want those who are going to actually put a piece of content, a raw piece of content online today. I want you to put a yes into the chat box, because I want you to commit to this. If you do so on LinkedIn, copy me in, and I'll be your first biggest fan, because I think it's so important to get started, given the fact that media today, media consumption is all the rage. We need to get onto this, and you'll get organic reach as a consequence of this. So please do this and copy me in. Like I said, I'll be all for it. Now, Keith has talked about some mega trends that which will hold in great stead if you follow. I just want to talk about something a little bit more psychological in nature when it comes to the future trends. Now, there's no doubt that there's absolute ambiguity in the air. From the biggest companies in the world that I'm speaking to the smallest one, nobody flipping knows what's going to happen in 6 months' time. Okay, I'm sorry. So don't go looking for answers anywhere. There's an increased level of ambiguity that's coming up. Now, this requires you to change the way that you work. The first thing I would say is we need to stop being order takers, whether it's with your clients, whether it's with your bosses, whether it's with your managers. Don't be those order takers. It's not a we say you do type of mentality anymore. It needs to be much more empowered. You need to step up to actually be the ones to actually create and be empowered to create those strategies. And I assure you, your bosses, your companies, your clients will really appreciate that. That's step one. So no more order taking. It's up to you, because the future is undefined. The second thing that I want you to do is I want you to do it with absolute passion, because it's passion, it's grit, it's that type of thing that is going to get you into the 9% club. It's the passion with which that you operate, that you show your clients by going that extra mile, whether it's now or in the future, that's really going to get them going and get to think, good things about you. And you're going to become indispensable. And in tomorrow's world, there's no hiding. You've got to become indispensable. So please do that with passion. And the final thought that I want to think about the changing world is the inversion between time and value. Now, what do I mean by that? There was a lovely saying that I read the other day. They said that there was a researcher who sat with Richard Branson for about a week, and he said the vast majority of the time, any of us could do Richard Branson's job. He does a lot of very mundane things to keep the company going, and a well-trained manager, accountant, whatever you would say, could do what he does the majority of the time. But actually, it's what he does for about 5 minutes of every day that nobody else can do in the world. And that's because it's in those 5 minutes where he creates and where he draws those insights, where he actually is able to create that level of business acumen that comes out, which differentiates him and creates billion-dollar companies. So the inversion in tomorrow's world is going to be, it's not about time. It's not about clock in, clock out. It's about how much value you can bring, which, by the way, doesn't have to take a tremendous amount of time. So please think about that and how you could add value to your businesses, to your clients, to your customers. And it doesn't have to take an exponential amount of time. It's not about the 9 to 5 anymore, guys. It's moving beyond that into a different realm. So not many predictions, but maybe a few actions that you could take, which would make all the difference. And please do copy me into that.
Yeah, can I just pick you up on that, because I love that that idea that you were saying about it's a little bit, the 80% of success is showing up and show up in front of your customers, and you're saying, hey, don't wait for the big polished campaign, start telling stories, post them on LinkedIn, get out there, hustle a bit, etc. And I've seen a few yeses coming up on the top right hand screen that people are going to take your challenge on. So
let's do this, guys.
Yeah, I'd say also, I'm on LinkedIn as well. Copy me in. I have over 200,000 followers, and I'll push it out on my base as well.
There we go. Oh, that's such a great offer, guys. Do not lose out on that. I know what happens when Keith does that. So, hey, that's a great offer, Keith. Thank you. Keith, another common question that we get asked. We've got 2 more questions, and we've got a few minutes. So let's kind of get through these quickly. At this time, would you cut budgets or increase them?
Well, hey, look, I've answered that a little bit, so that's one I can answer quickly. Of course, if you have to cut budgets, you should. But the things I would say is cut anything that is not customer facing. Now, if you cut all those budgets and you then still need to cut further, of course, you then have to look at advertising, etc. But I think the general thing is cut every single cost you can before you touch something which is customer facing, because back to my earlier point, if you can invest when everyone else is pulling back, then you'll be in a better place. And I suppose the only thing I'd argue about this is it's tough to do, but you can only spend that pound once, that euro once, that dollar once. So be hugely choiceful and make sure it works hard for you in generating business and sales, not in other stuff right now.
Wow, I love it. I totally agree. I just think, and I love the thought of actually, keeping whatever you can to the front line. Whatever the customer sees needs to still be seamless. It still needs to be creative. It still needs to be A-okay in order to get them to convert. I think you can use small ounces of creativity to do this as well. So, use that funny GIF, for example. Do organic posts, do lists. People love to do that on LinkedIn at the moment, where you're copying some of your key followers, for example. So substitute, as I said, money with effort. And I think you can go pretty far with that. But there is, and there is basis actually for increasing budgets at this time. Ubiquity, for example, ran a study where they basically found that actually if you increase your budgets now, your market share actually increased up to 1.7% when you get hit back on the rebound. So some good advice there. The final question before we take questions, what's the best pivot you've seen so far?
Well, funny, I know pivot is a word people love to use right now. I think pivot as a broad concept is hugely dangerous. Okay, so maybe you're maybe this isn't the answer you were looking for. This idea that the other field is always greener. That I'm here and I want to pivot over there because it's going to be better over there. I think a pivot works if a marketplace or an opportunity is opened up where you have the capabilities to succeed, not just succeed, but be competitive as well. But I can think of 1,001 examples of businesses pivoting because where they were felt miserable, but they pivoted to a place where someone else is very happy, and you will be greeted by that happy competitor by being hit over the head. So pivoting is dangerous. Now, clearly, if you have to pivot because you're stuck in a place where there's no business, of course, that's about survival. But pivoting because it's the trendy thing to do, I think is a two-edged sword. So look at the core capabilities you have, look at the competitiveness you have, and then pivoting could be a sensible thing. The obvious thing about pivoting is leveraging your brands or your capabilities to a changing consumer need, and whether that be examples like bar soap going into liquid soap. Yes, it's still about cleaning. That's a portfolio play where you're using your brand and using different parts, segmentation, different parts, and you're building up one part of the business as another part of the business phase. Because I don't believe in brand life cycles. I think brands die due to actually lazy marketers, poor marketers. I think there are product life cycles. The horse and cart, disappeared as a main form of transport as the product car came in. So I think there are product life cycles, but brands should be able to shift from different products in a similar area if the marketers are really on top of the trends. And so I would pivot using your brand expertise into different benefits rather than pivoting into different industries or areas, unless, of course, you were mentioning earlier, Richard Branson, who seems to be able to go from airlines through to, oh my God, trains. But for every Richard Branson, there are more failures out there from pivoting. So pivot if you need to, pivot if you can leverage your capabilities and competitiveness, but don't do it just because you feel a bit miserable and it looks a little bit happier elsewhere.
I love that. And I guess as part of your brand thought, which I think is a really powerful one, it's all about where can your brand stretch and where do you have license to operate within that environment in order to kind of be successful. And I think if you're a physical conference business and you go to online, then I suspect your brand stretch will stretch you far enough. But going in, being a physical conferencing business and then trying to start a business school may not be the smartest of things at this point in time. What's interesting to me about the pivot is don't pivot too early. Sometimes it's just, everyone's talking about we've got to be fast and agile to make solutions come up. I think of it a bit like a pendulum. And actually, we at the moment have swung all the way to one end. And actually, we don't quite know where the pendulum is going to swing back, when or how and what it's going to happen. So you might find yourself trying to pivot too early on where the pendulum is still in the unknown territory and in fact get it wrong on the rebound. And so the reality for me is actually a bit of wait and see mentality for a pivot is probably a good thing at this point in time. And probably sticking close to your customers if you're trying to do anything different and try and co-create that solution with them is probably where I would be at this moment. I recall a great book that I read by Simon Sinek called The Infinite Game. And it's a great book. And he basically talks about how actually in business, there's no endpoint. And in fact, it's all a continuum, right? People talk about I'm the best of the year, best financial, best results. The reality is business will continue on for a long time. And actually have that longer term mentality. Things may not be going good today, but they will very quickly change once again. And you'll be, you need to be in pole position over the long term as opposed to knee-jerk reactions in the short term. Before I close, I want to give you a bit of a trivia question. Keith, I wonder if you'll know the answer to this. During the credit crunch, I used to work with HSBC back in the day. And HSBC was one of the first companies to actually come up and admit that there was a problem in the US with the subprime mortgage crisis. And they gave a valuation of the extent of the problem in the first quarter of the extent of the crisis they thought they would face. It was $1 billion that they basically announced as what they thought the extent of the crisis was. At the end of the crisis, what do you think the total amount was that they had in defaults? Anyone might have that?
I don't know, but given the way you answered the question, I suppose the number was a lot bigger.
lot bigger. 17 billion. 17 billion. So where they thought the pendulum was going to be at the outset, it looked very, very, very different a little while later on. So I suspect there's a need to have a little bit of patience sometimes on these things. Guys, on that note, we are out of questions, but I would love to hand back to Chloe to perhaps see what questions have come up for us.
Thank you so much, Keith and Richie. That was an incredibly informative session. We've had some great questions come in from the live chat, so let's get started. The first one has come through anonymous. What are your thoughts about integrating the founder into the story of the business and therefore the marketing? Does it depend on the business? I am unsure whether people want to hear about me, but others have suggested it's a good move.
Shall I go for that one first, Richie?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, well, I suppose it depends, which I know is a very useless answer in some ways. It depends on, now, someone suggested you, so maybe you are charismatic and have an interesting story. But it comes back to that notion of what Richie was saying about creating stories. You know, is your story relevant to the brand or the service that you're offering? If it's just your story, well, in fact, the person who's most interested in your story are your parents and your friends, and little more than that. But if it's your story and it's relevant to your brand and services, two people I got to know very well in my job at Unilever was Ben and Jerry of Ben and Jerry's, and they're two great characters, and they are very much the sort of the radical campaigning hippies, which is the character of the brand. And to this day, the brand is still very much sort of campaigning for social justice and against the issues of climate justice. And I think that fits very well with an ice cream brand. And you might say, well, hold on, how does social justice and climate justice fit with an ice cream brand? But it's the way that both Ben and Jerry built their personality as founders around this sort of slightly sort of kicking back against the establishment ice cream brand. So I think it comes back to saying, can it be relevant to the story that you want to say for your brand, and can it be relevant for creating differentiation for your customers? Don't do it out of a vanity trip, and don't do it because your friends are trying to be nice to you and talk you up. Get back to the consumer focused and see how relevant is it. But what's your view, Richie?
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Keith. The thing for me, especially with an early stage business, is if you're not going to talk about your business and be passionate about your business, then nobody is. And the likelihood is that you probably won't have the funds to hire an agency to do it for you. So it's going to be raw, and it's going to be perhaps, I hate to use the word, but authentic. And maybe that's great. Maybe that's what it should be. I would say that as part of this is to find your voice, because it's so critical that, that you become comfortable in your skin around what you're trying to do, around the positioning, around some of the key things that you're passionate about that you can talk about. So I think finding your voice is critical to this. And the way that you do that, I think, is by hearing everybody else's voice too. So I follow some of the people that I love listening to. I found a lot of founders, and it's only because they've found their voice. They say something interesting, and they don't actually have to be terribly charismatic, but they just have to be someone that I can relate to. That's what I kind of treasure most in listening to those kind of people. And in fact, in one of Keith's portfolio, he's got a great example of that with Jules Lund, who's the founder of Tribe. Has been very successful at being able to bring his own personal brand to the table, whilst also being able to use that as a platform for his organization. So I think if you can combine those two things, it's really powerful. And I think you'll never know until you try. So I would act on that, and I think now is a good time to do that.
Amazing, thank you. The next one is from Colin. I am a small live events production company. How do I market myself against the bigger companies?
Well, right now, of course, I have tremendous empathy with you if you're in live events. My son works in sports events, and up until very recently, there's been no sports, and of course, there have been no events. So he's effectively out of work. And so, first of all, empathy about being events right now. I think how you can market yourself against big companies comes a little bit back to what Richie was just saying there. At the end of the day, is to be that little bit more passionate, throw in that little bit more energy, and go that extra mile. And that's all that small business can do against big businesses, because big businesses, while they have the resources of investment and money, what they do so badly still is that personalization, that attention to detail that a sort of a small business can do. And of course, the big challenge of every small business is as they get bigger, they lose that connection, that direct connection with their customers that works so well for their customers and for them. So I think the thing you have more than anything else is that ability to be flexible and agile and be able to respond to situations. And indeed, funny enough, you were just mentioning, Richie, about Jules Lund, who's the founder of Tribe. And Tribe is a influencer marketing platform using micro-influencers to create content, etc. And they are tiny compared to the big agencies. But what they've used is the ability to help in real time companies and be very responsive in a way a big company can't be. So it's using your size as your weapon against their size, which they can use in a different way. Richie.
Yeah, look, it's a toughie, right? It's a toughie in this environment too, because clearly, you're on the cold face. It was Colin, right, who asked the question?
It was.
Yeah, Colin. Yeah, look, I can totally understand. The one thing that I would say, right, is go back to the fundamentals of marketing and look at the 4 Ps. It's really simple, and actually do a bit of a mind map, right? And literally take each P and then see how you could kick the butt of bigger players in each of those 4 Ps. It'll take you 10 minutes to do that, by the way. Whether that's on price, whether that's on how you market yourself, whether you differentiate your product and propositions. You can pivot. I mean, I saw a lovely example of live artists who could no longer be in cafes, and musicians who could no longer be doing live performances. And they then actually went in and actually created a Zoom concert. And I know that's small, simple things, but actually it's about how you pivot in this environment to take advantage of some of the things that your bigger competitors wouldn't even dream of doing. So there's an innovation thing that I think you can think about. And the only other thing I would think about is brand leverage. And what that means is, if you can be alongside bigger brands, people will think you're a big brand. Okay. So it's easier now than ever before to actually form partnerships with larger organizations in whichever guise it takes. Maybe it's a bit of a freebie. No one knows it's a freebie. It's a small freebie, whatever it is. The point is, if you can get associated with those bigger brands and their portfolios, then actually you start to become associated with that big brand play. And I think that's really important right now. So think about the biggest customers that you may have and say, hey guys, do you mind if I put my logo there? Or would you mind if I do this video for you for free? But actually it'd be great if I could then, get alongside you in different things. Perception is reality. And I think that is something that I would consider. Fundamentals, 4 Ps, brand leverage.
Fantastic. Keith, you just mentioned about influencer marketing, and one of the questions that's come through is, what are your thoughts on engaging influencers? As a small food and drink brand, I get approached all the time, but I'm unsure on how to choose.
Yeah, a good question. And let's be clear, there are a lot of people who have been burnt in this area. In fact, I talked a lot against the influencer marketing industry only about 2 or 3 years ago, because in the early days there was a lot of very dodgy practices, and on indeed Instagram and on Twitter and indeed YouTube as well, a lot of fake accounts, and whether they be bots, and let's be clear, a bot doesn't eat or drink very much, so your food will not do well if you're buying bots' eyes, or indeed they could be buying eyes of a load of followers of a particular influencer, which have no relevance at all. Because what happened in the early days, the genuine influencers who were building followings and then this ability to buy. You can see it yourself. You can go online now and buy followers. The ability to buy followers meant they then got competitors from people who had, supposedly lots of followers, but actually there were a load of followers from wherever, Thailand or Bangladesh, that have been bought. And so then even the genuine influencers then had to go and buy some influencers, and you had this arm race of how many followers, sorry, not how many followers you had. And that arm race of followers, I think, really distorted the market. But there are tools that make sure that you can be genuine and understand how many followers someone has. So if you're being, if you're being approached by someone who is trying to tout themselves with lots of followers, I would do a little bit of research about finding out whether the followers are genuine or not. One way of doing it is to use a small agency, or to go to a company like Tribe, who can help you connect with micro-influencers. The one thing I would absolutely avoid is any sort of large celebrity influencers. They cost a lot of money. They're great if you're a big business. They have big reach, but compared to getting lots of micro-influencers added up, you can get very good reach from a handful of micro-influencers. So if you can afford to it, I'd go to an agency that can actually guarantee you're getting what you pay for, rather than making sure that you're just getting lots of followers as such, because they could be bots or they could be irrelevant followers. If you can't afford to go to an agency, then look yourself. You can see whether there's been genuine engagement, whether the people who are following that particular influencer are engaged in them, because engagement is what you're after. It's not numbers, it's engaged people as well. So I think influence can work, but it's an area where you can burn a lot of money for very little. So it's sort of beware slightly, but I think they're very relevant, particularly in the areas like food. If you can get a food influencer with followers who are interested in food, that can indeed magnify your presence with a very relevant and targeted audience. And that's why I think influencers themselves is an industry that's here to stay, if you can weave your way through some of the challenges.
If I may add to it, I know we're going to run out of time, but I'm going to be very short and say, if you can't afford it, I'm going to give you a 3-question test. Okay, 3 questions, simple as this. The first one is, would you post what an influencer is currently posting about? If you would, pretty good indication that you're kind of aligned. Second question, would you be friends with that person? Would you actually have a drink with them in the pub? Would you relate to them? Could you rely on them? And the third question is, would you follow them? And if you do follow them, would you actually trust them enough to buy what they're saying that is a good thing? 3 key questions. If you can answer these questions and all of them are yes, you're probably on to a pretty good influencer for you. Quality over quantity every time, especially in the SME space, guys. Keith said it, nail on the head. Everything is all about engagement. But think about the 3-question test.
Some great points. We've had a few questions come in, which is what we'll end on, about your 2 favorite marketing campaigns at the moment during COVID. So is there one that you've seen that you thought is extremely innovative, or one that's memorable to you, and why?
Do you want to go? I'll go with it then, Richie. So I think there are some terrible campaigns out there, and in fact, if you go and look at Drum, and by the way, if you want to ask me questions, I'm the Drum magazine agony uncle. So send in your questions there, and I answer them in Drum. But I did an article in Drum, and in that you can see the very samey advertising that's out there. And I think it's the biggest lesson is a lot of advertising says exactly the same thing, that we're on your side, and that these are challenging times, and we're here to support you. If you say all the same things as everyone else, you're just wallpaper. So I think you need to stand out in a distinctive way. And to me, the best one actually is a post. I make a great poster as well from Guinness, the classic Guinness branding of the black glass with the white head of the Guinness, but the white head of the Guinness was a white sofa, and so you can look at it and see a Guinness glass, and then you can look at it and with their call to stay home at the time. And I thought it was It was distinctive, it was differentiated, it was branded, but it still delivered a very relevant message.
Right. And for me, I think Keith's absolutely right about the differentiation part. And if you can create something which is counterintuitive, I think that gives you a hell of a lot of standout. And the one campaign that I saw that did this was Emily Crisps. They basically had bought they're a small business, and they basically bought their outdoor bus stop advertising slots before COVID began. And they were really worried that, everyone decided, well, during the lockdown, everyone stayed at home. But they decided to still use those slots, but rather than using the existing creative, they just were like, well, hey guys, we didn't want to waste the money. We decided to kind of use the posters anyway. No one's gonna see it, etc., etc. And I think what basically happened on the back of it was the reach they got on social, and it just went viral, was absolutely tremendous. So the entire thought process of the campaign or the strategy was outdoor, and the reality was they actually got a lot more on social because of it, because they were being counterintuitive at the time. So I think that's, for me, any campaign that can deliver some level of counterintuitivity is key and the winner.
Keith and Richie, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar. I'm sure our audience will agree that was a great session. I have included both Richie and Keith's LinkedIn profiles in the comments if you would like to connect with them. Before we sign off, do either of you have any final words?
Well, I would just say, look, it's very challenging times right now. And it's very easy to be in a corner licking your wounds because you've been rattled by A, B, or C. The only thing I'd say is try and remain positive. It's much more engaging for your suppliers and your customers if you're a little bit more Tigger and a little less Eeyore. It's impossible to be 100% Tigger right now, but actually being 100% Eeyore is incredibly draining for everyone around you. So think of that thought about radiators and the drains. If you can be a radiator and bring energy and possibility to the world, opportunity will follow. If you're a drain, actually people will start avoiding you. So my only thought to remain is try and be a bit more Tigger and try and be a little less Eeyore in these challenging times. Love it.
And a final note from me would be just to think that the timid trapeze artist gets killed every time. At this point in time, you need to basically be the one to take that leap of faith. You need to take that leap of faith with confidence and confidence in yourself, and that you will come out the other side. So just remember that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Our next webinar in the Lockdown Learning for Business series takes place on Wednesday, the 24th of June, with Simon Wishbrook from Popcorn, as he discusses building a qualified sales pipeline using email marketing. If there is anything you'd like to catch up on from today's session, we'll be sending out a replay of the webinar coming at 5 p.m. today. You can find the replay and future webinars at www.freshbusinessthinking.haysummit.com or by clicking on the link in the comments. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you again, Keith and Richie.
Thank you. Cheerio.
Thank
Bye
you.
all.